suspect any other classes are coming in or anything like that. So we'll go ahead and start. Is that okay, Cilli?
Okay.
All right. So our second to the last one today on the first day of Thesis 2026 is Cilli. She's got a really relevant topic, and I think the very first day she came to class, you kind of knew what you were going to do, right?
Yeah.
And you've been she stuck to her guns the whole time, even though I said things like, are you sure you don't want to look at it this way? She stuck to her guns the whole time. Very good. So her thesis title is Money Talks, the Danger of War's Profitability. I forgot to give her acknowledgments. Wait just 1 second. These are Cilli's words. She said, I would like to thank my parents and friends for their unconditional support. You guys mean so much more to me than I am able to express. I am beyond grateful for my advisor, Mr. Rio, who has been patient and enthusiastic in helping me finish my final high school project, despite all the chaos, non-effective advisor sessions, topic changes, and debates. I also like to extend my gratitude to the teachers who have always been willing to guide and advise me on doing my thesis, and to my boyfriend, who has always been there to accompany me, drive me, and support me throughout my thesis defense. Thank you. I promise no more advisor sessions will interrupt our dates. Okay, title is Money Talks, the Danger of War's Profitability. Let me get the timer set and I'll tell you when you can start. Just a minute, I have a malfunction. All right, you can start when ready.
Okay. Imagine a life where there's no safe place, where those who are supposed to protect you get on with your lives instead. Imagine yourselves as a mother who sent her son out to serve the country only to receive a folded flag in return. Imagine yourselves as teenagers with dreams big enough to change the world, but forced to bury those dreams under the pile of rubble on your front door. Now stop imagining. These are the lives of people just like us who live halfway across the world: Iraq, Ukraine, Palestine. Now, what guarantee is there that this won't be us? If war has become less about security and more about financial gains, who really benefits from their suffering? Human lives have become collateral damage for the sake of profit. Who will serve you justice now? War is often considered as a necessity. However, history tells us another fact about war that seems to get overlooked way too much. War does not only destroy wealth, it redistributes it upwards. The pattern of war profiteering has been showing even in the earliest records of war, all the way to war today. While security concerns are often genuine, economic incentives have repeatedly influenced how wars are sustained, expanded, and justified. Now, to fully understand this phenomenon, it is important to define war profiteering. War profiteering is the practice of generating excessive and/or unethical profit from warfare, be it provision of military goods and services or exploitation of resources. This happens under the control of politically and economically powerful corporations and individuals, which is why the quality of war profiteering lies in its systemic entrenchment. Those who profit from war are those with enough power to sustain it. So what lies in the future for upcoming generations? War prolonged for its profiteering opportunities creates the structure of inequality. While the majority pays the price, a selective group reaps the benefit of this disproportionality. Given the historical patterns, definitions, and real-life cases, this thesis will further argue that 1. War profiteering incentivizes the purpose of war from protection to profit. 2. War profiteering is a cycle of compound interest for the rich and compound poverty for the poor. Last but not least, it asserts that welfare must be prioritized over warfare. Stop normalizing war profiteering for the sake of business. Initially, the purpose of war in political philosophy and international law was not profit or expansion, but rather as an instrument to defend sovereignty, protect the citizens, and restore peace. However, as the world modernizes, war gets closely tied up with corporate profit, defense contracting, and private financial gain. It stops functioning solely as a mechanism of defense and instead becoming an economic strategy. War profiteering incentivizes the purpose of war from protection to profit. War profiteering does not serve those who fund the state. It serves an exclusive elite. War is not used to put an end to something. It is simply a tool to help keep the city in peace and ensure the welfare of its citizens. The ethics of war is later further developed as the just war theory, which consists of 3 subtheories: jus ad bellum, justice before war; jus in bello, justice during war; and jus post bellum, justice after war. Take the post 9/11 wars as an example of how profit-based wars violate these principles. President Bush claimed that the Iraq and Afghan wars served the purpose of saving the citizens from their dictator. But is it true? First, was the war initially just to begin with? According to the US Senate and international inspectors, the alleged weapons of mass destruction and production of chemical and biological weapons in Iraq did not exist, but the war was waged anyway. Before the war even began, it no longer pursued solely justice, but profit as well. Moreover, the war itself was not conducted morally. The war involved massive killings of innocent people from bombings, aerial strikes, urban combat, and the infamous Abu Ghraib prison that condones physical abuse, torture, and humiliation of prisoners. The war led to massive economical, geopolitical, and institutional setbacks in Afghanistan, who were supposed to be the ones saved in the beginning. This leads to our next claim. The people fund the military for security, not for a state of perpetual war. Because of these violations, people's support slowly started to decline. But despite that, the US government proceeded to wage the war, spending over $8 trillion. John Locke argued that governments are responsible to protect life, liberty, and property, which the people paid for through taxes. From this case, it is clearly seen how profiteering hinders the governments from fulfilling their duties in warfare. Citizens fund the military institutions for protection. Yet if wars continue to happen, security was never really achieved, but enormous financial costs were allocated for these wars. It figures why the people began to doubt the legitimacy of these spendings, because they did not get what they paid for. Now, if the government listens more to money than they do their own people, what is the purpose of democracy? Democracy depends on whether or not public policy reflects public interest. When these defense industries gain more and more influence on the government than the people, democracy loses its meaning. Most of these defense contractors gain their leverage through lobbying and campaign contributions to the Congress. In return, they get higher defense budgets, weapon programs and contracts, and also permits regarding arms exports and foreign military sales. Aside from that, the revolving door going on between the government and the defense firms allows corporate leaders to freely rotate into public offices and oversee contracts benefiting their own firms. War funds allocated by the US government have been found lost to waste, fraud, and corruption due to weak military oversight and lack of competitive bidding. With lack of transparency and accountability from the government, trust from the people will start to erode. War is morally justified only when it serves justice, protects the people, and maintains peace. War profiteering shifts the motive from solving a problem to prolonging these problems for the sake of profit. Although the phrase compound interest for the rich and compound poverty for the poor can be applied to multiple different fields, war profiteering specifically creates an extreme economic imbalance in which corporations and their respective investors gain profit from war while ordinary people pay the price. How is this manifested? 1. War profiteering is a zero-sum game situation, which means when someone profits from war, others will eventually suffer intentionally. 2. War profiteering always creates room for the rich to get richer and the poor to get poorer. And 3. In the end of the day, war profiteering will create a world where inequality will always prevail. A zero-sum game situation is a concept from game theory, which analyzes competitive interaction where one party's gain is directly cancelled out by another party's loss. War profiteering is a zero-sum game situation, in which the winning party will benefit and the losing party will suffer loss. However, most of the time, the victims of war are not only the defeated, but also the bystanders. They become collateral damage. During the Iraq War, while defense industries secure hundreds of billion-dollar deals via the Pentagon contracts, the broader economic impact was inflicted on the taxpayers. It was estimated that the war cost the US at least $2.2 trillion, not including the long-term expenditures of veteran care and interest of debt. Speaking of debt, the spending of the war was financed through borrowing rather than immediate taxation. As a result, future taxpayers, the bystanders, will be burdened with paying the interest of the war's debt for decades ahead. At the same time, due to the war, Iraq experienced extensive destructions towards their infrastructure, economy, and social systems, which caused a setback in their progress as a developing country. So yes, instead of resulting in a shared economic benefit, war profiteering results in a zero-sum game. This situation brings us to our next claim. War profiteering always creates room for the wealth gap to grow. The rich will get richer, and the poor will get poorer. Yes, war is profitable, only to those wearing suits in the office, not to those in the battlefield. Between 2020 and 2024, more than $2.4 trillion of Pentagon's discretionary budget went to private military contractors like Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, etc., who in the end received about $771 billion in total, generating billions of net profit for executives and shareholders. On the other side of humanity, the poor pay the price. Brown University finds that the post-9/11 wars have taken over 432,000 civilian lives caused directly by violence, and a total of up to 4.7 million deaths caused by the prolonged effects of war. So aside from being a geopolitical conflict, war also redistributes wealth, concentrating it among the upper elites. After gaining money, they will chase something else: power. Wealth gap always leads to power gap. This aligns with the arguments of the power resource theory on how social groups with greater resources have the power to shape political decisions in its favor, be it economic, organizational, or institutional. Political financing happens through campaign and party fundings, just like how the executives and affiliates connected to the defense industries, particularly those linked to the BAE systems, have made donations to political parties in order to gain access to policy making. One of the biggest threats to social welfare is war. It instills fear and disrupts peace. War in itself, one that serves its just and ethical purpose, is not the problem. The real problem is when the business of war goes hand in hand with the longevity of war. The sooner the action done to eliminate war profiteering, the better. Why? 1. War profiteering takes away the government's basic responsibility: education, health, and innovation. 2. Where there's war, there's inflation. And no one loves it more than those who profit from it. And 3. Why pull the trigger when you can shake the hand? The most effective way to eliminate war profiteering is to solve the problem without the existence of war. As said before, welfare includes equality of opportunities, economic stability, equitable distributions of accessible and affordable education, health services, and infrastructure. Excessive warfare funding harms this. For instance, the Russia-Ukraine war. Prior to the war, Russia was experiencing a stable GDP growth of 4.7% in 2021, along with a relatively stable welfare among its citizens. When the war escalated, its GDP contracted by 2.1%. In efforts to save their economy, Russia allocated 6 to 7% of their GDP to national defense, which caused depletion of public resources, persistent inflation, and civilian sectors struggling to cope with the lack of support from the government. Although the majority of the Russians have been able to adapt and accept the change, seen from the economic eye, an increase of GDP caused by military funding is unhealthy, as it concentrates the gains to the upper sector, while the majority makes barely the minimum and with equal or more production efforts than before. One of the primary mechanisms of war financing is printing more money, which inevitably leads to inflation. Where there's war, there's inflation. Inflation is often defined as a state of increase of prices over a given period of time. Though it is usually perceived as a bad thing, inflation actually favors the rich. Why? Because the richer people possess real and financial assets, like stocks, real estate, businesses, or gold. Meanwhile, poorer people mostly possess wealth in forms of cash and wages. Inflation causes the value of cash to decline drastically as it loses its purchasing power. And as the value of money decreases, the price of assets increases. For example, the case of Germany after World War I. In 1914, Germany abandoned its gold-backed currency, certain that the war would be short and could be financed through government funding. However, Germany was defeated and was forced to make payments to the Allies in gold-backed currency, which took a toll on Germany's economy. To make it worse, because of the debt, they couldn't afford to buy imported goods. And because they lost their colonies, they lost their access to cheap war materials. At the same time, billions of marks hoarded during the war suddenly came flooding back into circulation. By November 1923, $1 was equivalent to 1,000 billion marks, which very much benefits the US currency. Now, another frequently asked question is, why should we have war when we can have peace? Why pull the trigger when you can shake the hand? War profiteering can be avoided completely if we minimize the room for war. A study done by Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan states that nonviolent campaigns succeeded 53% of the time compared to violent ones. History repeatedly shows that diplomacy is more effective than violence. War should be the last resort in resolving a dispute. An example of this could be the diplomatic mediation of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis was 13 days of confrontation between the US and the Soviet Union due to the discovery of Soviet nuclear-armed missiles in Cuba. Knowing what the escalation of the war could lead to, Kennedy decided to approach the matter through diplomacy. Finally, the two leaders agreed on peace. The Soviet Union would return the missiles back from Cuba, and the US promised to never invade Cuba. Regarding these claims, some may argue that war profiteering actually contributes to global stability by strengthening military deterrence. Deterrence is a military strategy in which one uses the threat of counterattack to prevent an attack from the adversary power. An example of this strategy is the strategy of nuclear powers. Nuclear powers maintain a high level of instant and massively destructive capability against any aggression. This is what made the Cold War a Cold War, or in other words, a proxy war. In simpler terms, the concept of military deterrence is to make the adverse party think twice before attacking. Though this strategy may seem like it prevents large-scale wars, it doesn't mean that it doesn't cause human suffering. Instead of preventing violence, it resorts to relocating it in places that are less powerful. In fact, the proxy war that happened during the Cold War caused significant deaths in Vietnam, Korea, and Afghanistan. The Vietnam War alone caused a whopping 2.2 million civilian deaths on both sides and a whopping 1.1 million deaths in North Vietnamese and Viet Cong fighters. These conflicts reveal that military deterrence through weapons of mass destruction did not eliminate war, but relocated to less powerful regions. Thus, justifying profit-driven conflict risks sustaining global instability instead of preventing it. Aside from its more political aspects, some also may defend war profiteering as it generates employment, technological advancements, and economic growth. For example, not only does the US defense sector alone provide over 2.2 million job opportunities, technological advancements founded through government-funded innovations have historically led to civilian applications, such as the GPS and aerospace technologies. Seen from this perspective, war-related industries function as engines of economic and technological progress, and the ever-existence of conflict is what drives these advancements. However, economic benefits do not and should never justify a system that is structurally tied to conflict. The economic benefit gained through defense industries can actually be achieved through more socially beneficial and less destructive sectors. Furthermore, reliance on military-driven growth creates a perverse economic dependency, where prolonged conflict becomes necessary to sustain employment and national profit. Therefore, war profiteering distorts economic priorities, which can possibly make peace economically inconvenient. War is meant to protect, to serve justice where it's due. But look around you. Is that what's really happening? If so, why is poverty so much worse than it already is? Why are innocent people dying, and why is no one doing anything about it? For the small circle of contractors and their investors, war behaves like compound interest. Contract after contract, and programs after programs. On the other side of the equation, the same compounding happens in reverse. Compound debt, compound poverty. War is treated as a financial generator, and humanity is treated like collateral damage. Are you sure you want to normalize this culture? Think about your future kids. Would you want them to live in a world that prioritizes warfare over welfare? Stop normalizing war profiteering for the sake of business. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Cilli. Our panelists today are Joey, who's from our school board, and Mr. Joel. Mr. Joel, why don't you go first?
Okay, well done, Cilli. Thank you for your enthusiasm with this subject matter. It is timely. It is very timely. I was looking up the number. Can you tell me off the top of your head, like how many current conflicts and wars are happening currently, like in our time right now?
There's the Iraq War, obviously, and then multiple wars around Asia, I believe. Maybe it's not really a war now, a large-scale war now, but it's a conflict that could have potential to escalate into a war.
Okay,
Yeah.
I wanted to add a few to there. Venezuela.
Yeah.
Right, that's a big conflict. Myanmar is currently under conflict. Do we qualify that as a war? Because it's just a conflict internal to its country, to its territory, but it's a conflict between groups.
Yeah.
So how would you qualify that?
It could be considered as a war because, as you know, there is something called civil wars, which inside one party, there's two different groups, social groups that have conflicts with one another. So, yeah.
Yeah, so you have two different. It's like tribal.
Yeah.
The people in power. It's a tribal group. I forget the name of the tribal group, and that's Karen or something, Kachin, and they're fighting against, like it's a religious minority. But those in power using force. Are you saying is it always economic, or are there actually tensions, other factors that are driving that conflict?
There could be other factors that could drive the conflict. It could be ideological. It could also be just because of disagreements, social disagreements that can escalate into a larger scale conflict.
Okay. One of my questions that I wanted to get an evaluative feedback from you. You cited Augustine and Aquinas and just war theory,
Yes.
and they're using, obviously these are theologians using scripture and their reasoning to say this is, war in these circumstances is just. So using their framework that you looked through, what about, okay, the Lebanon-Israel war, Gaza-Israel, Iran, U.S. and Israel, Ukraine, Russia. Which of these wars are just, in your opinion, which are unjust? How do we distinguish between them?
So, according to the research that I did for my thesis, the Iraq war that was waged by the United States, it was initially started because of alleged findings of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And President Bush also started the war because he claimed that he wanted to save the citizens of Iraq and Afghanistan because inside those countries itself, there are already unjust conflicts happening towards the citizens. But we see that throughout the execution of the so-called saving itself, the U.S. military did not really conduct the war morally because they abuse the prisoners and then they kill innocent people. Like, they didn't really achieve the intention that they have in the beginning.
Yes, I agree with that. And I was in high school. I remember when I watched George, like all of the debates, and it was Colin Powell who brought a vial test tube of like, this is evidence of chemical weapons found in Iraq, and he brought it before Congress, and so we had that evidence presented to us, and so we all believed it. And then, you know, as things progressed, it was just a sad reality. Is actually no chemical weapons were ever destructed or discovered. So I'm curious about. Tell me an example historically of a just war where you would say, actually, that was merited, that was okay, that was just.
I could use the World War I as an example of a just war because World War I was needed to, I guess, to calm down Germany's ambition of trying to control everything. It is also used to protect, war is also used to protect sovereignty, defend sovereignty over a nation's sovereignty. So it also is able to balance out the power that is owned by each country so that not one country doesn't overpower the whole thing.
Okay. Bringing up World War I and subsequent World War II also, this leads me to a side question, another question about global ally proxy wars. So we're no longer, I don't think we're any longer just fighting one country. It's not country to country. There's webs and chains and alliances. There's NATO and its allies. There's BRICS nations and like their affiliates. And then there's Muslim Brotherhood and the Arab Spring, the Arab countries. They all have their own kind of allegiances. How would just war theory or war profiteering, how would we view these? These are multinational. They're not just one government. It has to so that presents some complexity to this debate or this discussion.
Yeah. Okay. So because war is a complex situation, it will be extremely difficult to distinct the actual intent of a group or a nation for why they wage wars or why they start the conflict. But my thesis solely argues that if economic incentives becomes tied up with war, it causes war to become not for defense or not for its sole its initial purpose of defending sovereignty, protecting the citizens, and restoring peace, but for the sake of private financial gains or their own benefits.
Okay, I want to ask you about so with this, just because there's profit involved, does not necessarily negate the war was wrong or initiated incorrectly. With jihad, it was initiated as a holy war, but of course territory was acquired. Resources and cities and all of these assets were acquired through a holy war. Just because there's a correlation doesn't mean it's a causation,
Yeah.
right? And just because, let's say, Israel and the U.S. are now expanding a global conflict, that's not. Is it necessarily, in your opinion, is this a just war? Can it still, in its early stages, still be considered a just war?
So, profit, my thesis is not against profit, as you said before earlier. But because profit will happen during war, inevitably, because the weapons and logistics and all the other research and developments is controlled by private industries, because the government doesn't have enough resources and time to make advancements as much as these private industries do. So the governments also rely on these private industries for equipments for war. But if the problem is not really the profit itself, but because of the profitability of war, these defense industries, like they support the continuation of conflict for the sake of their own benefit.
Okay.
All right, we need to move on to Mr. Joey.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay. That was a nice presentation. It's very well made, your thesis.
Thank you.
I just want to mention that I think your thesis over-romanticized diplomacy. So you always say that diplomacy is better and everything, but I want to say that peace requires strength and not just good intentions. So diplomacy only works when there is strength behind it. So when you shake hands with your other party, there should be a big gun aiming at them. So they will take that seriously because they know there will be consequences. So I think diplomacy without credible force is not peace, it's just hope. So you're just hoping that they will not fire a gun at you.
Okay.
And I think also the reason why major powers after 1945 hasn't had a major conflict is because they know the consequences if they start one. During the Cold War, they know about the MAD strategy, the MAD, mutually assured destruction, because if someone starts, the entire world will end because they will start nuclear war. So fear prevented escalation. And fear is also a good point in diplomacy. So it's also interesting for me that you pick World War I for your example of a just war, because World War I then leads to the Weimar inflation, if you remember,
Yes.
which rises which lower the marks incredibly low, and also caused the Nazi to rise, and also later will show the Munich Agreement. The Munich Agreement, if you remember, is also probably, we can argue that it's the start of World War II. And it's an example where diplomacy actually failed because they just concede, okay, Germany, you can take over Czechoslovakia without any war, and they didn't stop there. So that's the Munich War. And then, before I discuss to profit, I want to make sure about why countries start wars. So they start wars in the first place is because of survival. So war is rooted in human nature and state of survival. It's not corporate profit. Just like Mr. Joel mentioned a bit, that I think your thesis confused correlation and causation. So profit may exist during
Yes.
war, but that does not mean profit caused war. So for example, if there is a farmer profits when there's a drought. So when there's a drought, the crop's price will go up, but that does not mean the farmer caused the drought.
Yes.
So they just benefit from the drought. And it's a similar thing here. So the defense company may profit, but they didn't cause the war. So, and also wars existed before capitalism, before corporation, and before the stock market.
Yes.
And back then, humans fought over land, resources, trade, survival, everything, before capitalism and stock market existed. So war did not begin with shareholders. And states prepare for war because losing war is catastrophic, as seen in the Weimar inflation. And Germany collapsed because it lost the war, not because of the war. So nations do not spend those $8 trillion and everything because it's profitable, but they do it because losing the war is catastrophic. So I think the real issue is not the profit, but the real issue is the accountability. So whether the state remains accountable, as you mentioned about the just war, whether it's accountable before, during, and after the war. So if there is corruption, we should punish the corruption.
Yes.
But removing profitability will not remove war. So this is where I think your thesis become morally inconsistent. So the more I read your thesis, I see that this thesis applies morality selectively. So you mentioned about profits during war, but there are many industries that profit during crisis. For example, pharmaceutical companies, they profit during pandemics. Cybersecurity companies profit during cyber attacks. And media companies profit during disasters. But we still accept those industries because they serve important functions in our society. So we do not accuse hospitals for creating disease simply because it generates revenue. So I think profit itself is morally neutral. So the real problem is, yes, it's corruption, abuse of power, and exploitation. But if the argument is making profit during crisis is inherently immoral, then I think this is no longer a criticism of war profiteering. So it becomes a criticism of capitalism itself. And history already has a label for economic systems that treat profit as morally suspicious. Oh, communist. So yeah, it's very similar to communism. Anything you want to might add on that?
So I completely agree with you that that profit does not cause war, and profit because of war is not inherently immoral. Because, as I said before when I answered Mr. Joel's question, profit during war and during any other types of crisis is inevitable because, again, we all rely on multiple different sectors and multiple different fields that supply and provide for our respective needs during these times of crisis, including war. So I do agree with you. And just to clarify, my thesis, though it might maybe seem like it's morally inconsistent, but I do agree with you that when you said that profit does not mean war is inherently immoral. And my thesis argues that profit should not be the reason why wars are prolonged only for the sake of profit.
How do you prove that it's prolonged because of profit? Just happens, things just happens. We tried, but it failed.
This
The definition.
uh,
What's the definition so that you can say that this war is prolonged because they want to take profit?
It is because war is a complex matter and not everything is open to public knowledge. We cannot really distinct whether or not what is the intent of the war itself. But that's what that's one of the things that my thesis also argues, that the government should be accountable and should be transparent during times of war towards the citizens so that we know as well.
Okay, so far, then you mean it's okay to take profit during war, but it's bad if it's prolonged to take profit during war. So taking profit itself is fine then. Then war profiteering is basically okay to do it.
Profit during war is inevitable, as I said before, because the governments do rely on these private industries for the equipment they need for war. But sometimes, some cases happen that the war itself, the conflict itself is prolonged because of profit.
Okay, so also that's a good argument. So you're mentioning that it's bad if the war is prolonged because of profit,
Yes.
even though it's difficult to check whether, it's difficult in reality to check whether if this war is prolonged due to profit or not.
Yes.
That's a good argument. And also I want to focus on the second argument that you mentioned about profiteering benefits elites and not the public. That's what you wrote on your thesis, but I also want to mention that in capitalism, its ownership is not exclusive to the elites. So in the modern market, there are retail investing, ETFs, and everyone. So everybody can invest, and capitalism distributes opportunity through ownership, including having the means and responsibility over how they participate in the economy. So how do you think about that? So your argument said that war profiteering benefits only the elites, not the public. But through the modern market, you can buy Lockheed Martin, you can buy RTX, you can buy NOC, you can buy General Dynamics and everything.
Okay, thank you for the question. So I agree that now, because of the publicization of so because it's available to everyone for them to buy stocks and shares of these companies that do profit during war, but we cannot assume that everyone is able to buy those things because not everyone has access to those in terms of maybe economical and even social.
We're actually out of time, so we're going to have to stop now. But thank you, Joey and Mr. Joel. Mr. Joey, Mr. Joel. Good job, Cilli. So in the next 5 minutes, we're going to meet Cilli panelists, advisors, and family and friends over here for photos. And then we will move on to Jefferson.
Thank you. Thank you.